live here on this Tuesday, September 11th, 2007. I'm Brian, is the host for a number of years now, and we're talking about the Vermont Stage Company. Mark Nash is the guest. And on a positive note, Mark, this is the first show into the 14th year, I believe, of Street Signs. The first program was September 20th, 1994. Molly Lambert hosting it. The guest was Tim Halverson. So Mark, welcome aboard on to the first anniversary show of the 14th year.
Thank you, and congratulations. And as it turns out, it's Vermont Stage Company's 14th season that we're going into also.
So yeah, Vermont Stage. In fact, I remember when you guys were performing at Royal Tyler Theater.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, we started, actually the very first show in '94 was at Champlain College, and then a couple years later we moved into Royal Tyler for a few years, and then in 2000 we moved into Flynn Space.
Wow. And so, Mark, you are the artistic director, and Mark and I will be accepting phone calls for the next half hour until about 7 tonight, and discussing Vermont Stage and what they do in the 2007-2008 season. And you can watch rebroadcast of this program over VCAM, Channel 15, over Lake Champlain Access Television, also Channel 15, also Burlington Telecom, Channel 15, and as of the last show, over YouTube. Indefinitely. So welcome aboard, Mark.
Thank you.
And tell us, this is the 14th year. How do you think this began? I mean, you haven't been involved all these years. What do you hear about how this all began?
Well, you know, there wasn't really a locally producing professional theater company in town. After there was the Vermont Repertory Theater that was happening over at 40th and Allen for a while. Rusty DeWeese got his start over there. And that was in the mid to late 80s, and then that closed down, and Blake Robison showed up in '94 and said, Burlington needs some locally produced professional theater.
Right.
Let's get it going here. And he, as I said, he started up in '94, and it grew pretty quickly. And then in 2000, Blake took off for another job elsewhere and gave me a call and said, you want to take over? And it was right around the same time that the Flynn Center was building Flynn Space. And so sort of all of these things came together at once. I started my new job at Vermont Stage, and we started a full subscription season, and Flynn Space opened. And that first season we did Midwives, which was a big hit for us. And since then, it's just been growing steadily for the last 7 years.
So other than what the Flynn brings into the main stage, it's yourself and what St. Michael's College and what UVM does, and probably, say, Champlain also does some productions. Yeah,
and there's a couple other smaller amateur companies, and then there's folks like Lost Nation down in Montpelier. There's Green Candle that still does productions here. I don't know if you know Jim Lance, but he did a show at Flynn Space called The Bus last year. He's doing The American Machine this year in September. So a lot of independent producers, but we're sort of unique in that we're the only company in Burlington proper that does a year-round season professional theater every year on a regular basis.
So you probably know the folks involved with the other organizations, and you get together and say, are you doing this so we don't do this? And so we don't. There's not a conflict.
Exactly. We want to make sure that we don't overlap the shows that we're doing.
Yeah.
And UVM's probably the one that we pay the most attention to try and not do the same dates that they do. Usually the material that we do is always very different, but sometimes there's a little juggling to make sure that we don't overlap dates.
And as far as dates go, do you have first choice at Flynn Space throughout the year?
Pretty close. Flynn has its own programming that they put in there, so that gets first choice, and then after that we pretty much have a pretty open selection.
And we were talking before about shows you did last year.
Yeah.
I was handing you the program from True West.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what happened with Vermont Stage 2006, 2007?
It was a great season for us. We started out with True West, as you mentioned, a fun Sam Shepard show. We did Winter Tales, which is now it's our annual holiday show. Willem Lang hosts an evening of stories and songs. Then we did Woody Guthrie's American Song, which was a big hit for us. People really enjoyed Woody Guthrie's music. Then we did a one-man show called I Am My Own Wife, which was an amazing piece of theater. And then we finished with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is one of my favorite plays. And really well received by our audience. So it was, I think, one of our most artistically successful seasons, and the audience was right there supporting it.
Now, you were saying before the show that you're thinking about next year already, what to do.
Yep.
So when you decide you're going to do a show, how much of it is based on the limitations of the theater itself?
It's a great question. I used to take the limitations of the theater into a lot of consideration, and then I did a show 4 years ago called The Miracle Worker.
Okay.
And it calls for a second-story window. Well, you've been in Flynn Space,
Sure.
and you can see that the ceilings are only 10 feet high. There's no way to put a second-story window in that. Our designers figured out how to do a set that suggested a second-story window while not having to use up more than 10 feet. And I thought, boy, if they can do that, if we can pull off that kind of design feat, there probably aren't any limitations in terms of space.
Right.
So mostly my limitations have to do with the size of the cast.
Yeah.
It's a little bit hard to do a show with 20 people, although we did Our Town, and that had 20 cast members.
Okay.
But it gets a little crowded in there. Sometimes my limitations have to do with, is another company doing it, or did it just get done?
Right. Because you have 1,400 to 1,500. If you were doing it on the main stage,
Yeah.
I think it seats 1,451.
Right.
Thinking about filling that every night, it's
Right.
tough.
Well, we only seat about 130 people,
Right.
but we do 12 to 18 shows. So that equals out to 1,800 to 2,400 seats.
Yeah.
We have as big a job to fill our 2 or 3 weeks as the
Okay.
Flynn upstairs does to do one night.
Sure, sure.